We're in part 2 today of our series, Afterlife, and we're unpacking in this series what the Bible actually says about what comes next. What happens in the afterlife? When I was 15 years old, I was in a car with my cousin Richard. Richard had just gotten his license a couple of days before. I don't know how it is for you. Listen, my daughter Sienna, when she turned 16, I was sitting there going, hey, you ready to get your car? She's like, It's like, you ready to get your license? She's like, I don't know. That was not the case when I was growing up, man. We were like, we were out the door. I didn't see my parents for 6 years after I got my license. So Richard gets his license, and we find any reason in the world to get out of the house, right? And so, drive around a little bit. And so one day, we're heading to the store, and we came up to Center Point Parkway in Birmingham, Alabama. Center Point Parkway is a major road. It's got 3 lanes on each side with a median in between. And we were coming up to the Center Point Parkway. We needed to turn right, and Richard looked, but he just never saw the other car. And we were both jolted out of our seats when the front driver's side of his car was hit by another car going full speed down Center Point Parkway. Everyone ended up being okay. But as we got out of the car and we looked at the damage, it was real clear, real quickly, that it could have been a real different story. If you were looking at the front or the driver's side of the car, and you've got the front of the car kind of over here on your left as you look at the car, here is where the other car struck us. And right about here is where Richard was sitting. That's all the difference there is sometimes between life and death. And whether we really want to face it or not, at some point we all have to grapple with the reality that all it takes is a moment. All it takes is about 48 inches to bring about our last moment. And I know that's not comfortable to talk about. Some of you are like, you're new here, you're like, what did you invite me to, all right? I know that's not comfortable to talk about. I get it, man. I know that none of us really like it, but look, truth is, we gotta grapple with it at some point. We gotta grapple with what happens after this life, because the one thing that we all share in common is that day is coming. I hope that's not a surprise to you. It's coming. And that's not to freak us out. It's to make sure that we're prepared for it. That we're prepared for the afterlife. There's an interesting statement actually made in the New Testament that gives some real clear instruction for followers of Jesus related to this. And yet it might be one of the most, in my opinion, maybe one of the most ignored statements in all of the New Testament writing. One of the first Christians, his name was Paul, he writes this in a letter to some Christians living in the city of Colossae. This is what he said. He said, since you have been raised to new life with Christ, in other words, since you are a life changed by Christ, listen to this, here it is, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. You know what Paul's saying? Paul's saying, set your sights, fix your gaze, give your attention, think about, reflect on what? Heaven. What's next? Eternity. And yet so often, I'll be straight up with you. So often, at least for me, I tend to get so focused on this life, so focused on this day, so focused on what's happening right now that I forget there is a much bigger reality than the one I can just see and touch and experience right here, right now. Imagine for a second that Elon Musk gets his wish. Some of you are like, which wish? He has 1 million. All right, this one, go with me. Imagine that Elon Musk gets this one wish to see his vision lived out, to be able to send some people to Mars. Some of you are like, I don't want to go to Mars, but I will volunteer some other people. I know some people right now I'd love to send there. So let's just imagine for a second, we got a group of people that has said, I'm willing to go do this. And imagine this first crew of people spends 5 years, probably what it would take, right? 5 years meticulously planning for this flight, for this trip, the coordinates they're gonna need to go on, the way that they will keep themselves alive during the flight, how they'll do the bathroom thing. I don't know how you'll do it. They're gonna figure that out. They're gonna study the vessel that they're traveling in, the ship. They're gonna make sure that they know how to problem solve everything that comes up on the way and on that trip. And they are prepared and they are ready for that flight. They've been studying for years. But then, about 4 days before they're supposed to launch, before they're supposed to take off, it strikes one of them, they've never thought about Mars. They haven't once thought about where they're going, what the atmosphere is like, what the planet's like. They've done nothing to think about the destination. Now listen, my guess is that other than a few fleeting moments at a funeral every now and then, we really don't think much about our destination either. What's next? We focus so much attention on the trip here, giving so little thought to where we're going. And so this series is all about the destination. It's all about what's next. What does the Bible actually say things are gonna be like? And the reason that Paul made that statement to followers of Jesus all those years ago to set your sights on the realities of heaven is because the more thought that you give to what's coming, to the afterlife, to what's next, the more thought you give to it, the more meaning and the more peace and the more joy and the more comfort it will produce in this life. Our possessions take on new meaning in light of heaven. Our suffering and our pain takes on new meaning in light of heaven. Our relationships take on new meaning in light of heaven. Here's the way to say it. This is kind of one of the bottom lines for this entire series. Maybe you can sum it up like this. What you believe about the afterlife will shape how you live today. What you believe about the afterlife is gonna shape how you live today. And here's what I wanna drill down into today very specifically from a topic standpoint. What you believe about the afterlife will shape how you grieve today. Now, to talk about that and to drill down into that, I want to look at a passage from a letter written from the guy I mentioned a moment ago, Paul, one of the very first followers of Jesus. He ended up becoming a leader in the church, and he wrote this letter to some other Christians living in a city called Thessalonica. Kind of a weird name for a city, but that's what it was named. I would love for you to see this. This is in a letter. Turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and if you have a Bible or need to use a Bible around you in the seats, we got them on all of our campuses right now. Page 906. You need to scroll there on your mobile device, open up your YouVersion app. I don't really care. Just get there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I want you to see this because the words that Paul writes here offer us some encouragement and gives us some instruction and gives us some clarity about the afterlife. Now, as you're turning there, let me give you a little bit of context real quick. Apparently, some of the people who were living in Thessalonica who were Christians at the time, followers of Jesus, apparently some of them had experienced the loss of loved ones. Some of their loved ones had died. And they had some questions, like we all do when people close to us die. One of the questions they were raising is, where are they now? Will we see them again? And the Apostle Paul speaks into these, and I want to unpack a few things he says, and in particular, one thing that he says that is so deeply encouraging. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, look at verse 13. And now, dear brothers and sisters, we want you to know what will happen to the believers who have died. By the way, he's saying you can know. There's so much that's a mystery about the afterlife. There's so much we don't know, but Paul's saying, and Jesus reveals, and the scriptures reveal, there's some things we can know. You can have assurance about. He says, we want you to know what will happen to the believers who have already died, so you will not, listen to this, grieve like people who have no hope. Now just pause here for a second. See, Paul marries these two, he brings together these two ideas that on the surface seem to be at complete odds with one another. Grief, hope. Paul says they can live side by side. Remember, he said the whole point that he's writing, he says, so you will not grieve like people who have no hope. You can grieve with hope. When you experience, and here's one thing I just want to point out with this real quick. When you experience the loss of someone close, he's saying that grief is the most natural response to that. It is the most natural human emotion in response to that loss. Grief is natural, it is expected, it is a necessary part of this life. Grief is part of a broken world. Death is not the way it's supposed to be. And you know part of the reason, one of the reasons I feel like I just need to point that out real quick is because every now and then I hear followers of Jesus say really dumb things to people who've lost a loved one. They say things like, oh, you don't have to be sad, they're in heaven. It's like, yeah, I kind of want them here though. Don't say dumb stuff. Sometimes just sit with people in the midst of their loss. It's okay to grieve. Paul's saying that is natural. But here's the thing, Paul nuances it, doesn't he? He says that it's possible though to grieve, that's all natural and real, but you can do it with hope. These two things can live side by side. To grieve, but to do so with the assurance of what's coming. You can have faith and grieve. You can have hope and grieve. The question is how? How in the world does that happen? Why is it that followers of Jesus can grieve with hope? And Paul answers this by what he says next. I'm gonna read some of this. We're gonna read a couple of verses, probably about 5 verses here. It's kind of dense. Follow along with me. I'm gonna try my best to explain it here after we read it. Look at verse 14. He's saying, all right, let me explain why you can grieve with hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and was raised to life again, well, we also believe that when Jesus returns, God's gonna bring back with him the believers who have died. We tell you this directly from the Lord. We who are still living when the Lord returns will not meet him ahead of those who've died, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. And first, the believers who have died will rise from their graves. And then, together with them, we who are still alive, remain on the earth, will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and then we will be with the Lord forever. So encourage each other with these words. Now, there's a lot here. Paul talks about some huge ideas in these 5 little verses here. And I just want to take a moment and try to make sure that we understand some of the things that Paul is saying. And I want to try to make it real simple here for a second. Best way to do that is just show you an illustration. I want you to imagine, we got this line on this wall right here. I want you to imagine this line as human history. Kind of human history is represented along this line right here. And Paul is saying that the defining moment, if you're a follower of Jesus, you believe this, right? That the defining moment, the apex of human history was the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. All of human history centers on this one moment right here. But Paul also said something really interesting. He also says that there will be a moment, and Jesus, by the way, promised this, that Jesus will come back. He's gonna come back to judge the living and the dead and to rule forever. I didn't know how to represent that, so it's just a burst there, right? That's Jesus, he's coming back. And what Revelation 21 tells us, a fascinating chapter, you really should read that at some point. What Revelation 21 tells us is that in that moment, when Jesus returns, he will make all things new. Everything. In fact, the way that it's described is that God will restore all of creation to its original intent. That longing for justice that you have, he will bring justice. That longing for wholeness and peace that you have, he will bring wholeness and peace. Actually, it's what the Bible calls the new heavens and the new earth. All things will be remade. And in the new heavens and the new earth, again, Revelation 21 says this, there will be no more grief. There will be no more tears. There will be no more loss. There will be no more cancer. There will be no more betrayal. There will be no more sorrow. All of the things that cause grief. But the reality is, and you know this, the Thessalonians knew this, we're not there yet. We're in this space right here between when Jesus first came and when he's coming again. And apparently, living in this space here, this was what was kind of concerning some of the people who were in Thessalonica that Paul is writing to, because they believed that Jesus is gonna come back and usher in the new heavens and the new earth. But the reality is he hasn't returned yet. So they're sitting there going, but what about my uncle who died last year? What about my friend who passed away a few years ago? Where are they now? What's happening with that now? And this is what Paul is speaking to. And in particular, there's 2 things I just want to point out in the words we just read, 2 things to understand here that tell us why we can grieve with hope for followers of Jesus that we know who have passed. The first is this. Followers of Jesus who have died are at peace in the presence of Jesus right now. That's real clear from this passage. This is one of the reasons we can grieve with hope. Followers of Jesus who have died are at peace in the presence of Jesus right now. Remember, when Paul says that the living will be caught up with them as they come with Jesus, the assumption made is if they're coming back with Jesus, that they're, of course, in the presence of Jesus right now. In fact, Jesus actually speaks to this whole idea right here. While he's hanging on the cross, you may remember this story if you've read, the story of Jesus' crucifixion. There's actually a man, Jesus wasn't crucified alone. He had 2 other people that he was crucified, one on his right and on his left. And one of the men who's hanging next to him, a criminal who's hanging next to him, being crucified, at one point, he begins a conversation with Jesus, and there were eyewitnesses who overheard this conversation. Crucifixions were public executions, and so John actually records this, and one of the guys who makes the declaration on the cross says, Jesus, I believe who you are. Jesus, I believe that you are who you say you are. And then in response to that, Jesus says this to that man. This is fascinating. And Jesus replied to him, I assure you, when? Today. That's for you to talk. All of our campuses, when? Today. Not tomorrow, not once I come back, Not in the future, some indeterminate time. Today you will be with me in paradise. The Apostle Paul, who we've been reading some here today, he said at one point, to be absent from the body, in other words, when I die, is to be present with Jesus. See, when you die, your physical body dies, but you don't stop existing. You are so much more than a body. You know that, right? You are so much more than a body. This is why Jesus made this point. He made this statement at one point. This is in Matthew chapter 10. Listen to what Jesus said. He said, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. Like, that's gonna die. Your body's going to die at some point. He's like, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They can't touch your soul. Now, that's a fascinating little statement. He's saying there's a part of you that is eternal, that exists. And so when we die, even though our body is in the ground, our soul lasts forever. Here's what I want you to hear. Death is not the end. Death is not the end. We don't cease to exist in death. We move, we transition. There's lots of different, I don't know, whatever metaphor or word you want to put to it. Our bodies cease until Jesus comes back, by the way, and then our bodies will be resurrected. Remember, that's what Paul was saying. You're like, what body's gonna be resurrected? The one I'm in now, I'm not sure I want this one. I don't know, all right? I do know it'll be perfect. It will be free of flaws. It will be free of sickness. It'll be free of all that. It will be what Paul says in a glorified state. That's all we're really told. But until that day, what happens? Until that day, we are in a conscious state of being without bodies. And one note I just want to make, and I feel real compelled to make this point, because I know some of your stories and some of the ways that traditions maybe that you grew up in where you were told some of these things, and I want to make this real clear. There is absolutely no mention in all of the Bible. You can start at the first page, go to the last. There's no mention. Jesus never speaks of this. No mention in all the Bible of the idea of purgatory. Not in there. Or needing to go to some space in between heaven to atone for any sins. What the Bible actually teaches is that the work of Jesus on the cross is the full and final payment for all sins. You don't have to add to that. In fact, if you've placed your faith in Jesus and Christ, and what he did to cover your sins, there isn't more you need to do. If you did, that would render what Jesus did on the cross as ineffective, useless, that it wasn't quite enough. We can grieve with hope. We can grieve with hope for followers of Jesus who have died because they are currently at peace in the presence of Jesus. They are in God's care, at peace. And when Jesus returns, so will they. Here's the second reason Paul says in this passage we just read that we can grieve with hope. We will be reunited with loved ones who follow Jesus. We'll be reunited with loved ones who follow Jesus. When Jenny and I were dating years ago, back in the 1900s, we spent a couple of those first summers apart, like we didn't get to see each other, and we were kind of in that stage. You remember that stage in your relationship where you're on the phone? You guys remember phones, by the way? That you picked them up, they had cords attached to them. Anyways, we were on the phone and we were kind of in that stage where it's like, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. No, we'll fall asleep together on the phone, right? It's kind of like that stage. Anyways, when we would separate from each other to go away for the summer or whatever, it was kind of like this, I'm not gonna see you for 2 days. What are we gonna do, right? And so we would go away, actually a couple of times where we had to go away for a month or two or whatever, and so it was kind of hard. And there were tears. And there was a longing. But every time we had those tears, do you know what? It never threw us into depression. It never really deflated us. Why? Because we knew we'd see each other again. That's hope. It's longer than we want. It's not what we wish for, but we'll see each other again. And we can grieve with hope because our loved ones who followed Jesus, we'll see him again. We'll be reunited. Remember what he said in chapter 4, verse 17, we just read. He said, then, he says, we're gonna be called up together. And he goes, and then together with them, the people who've already passed. Together. Paul is describing a reunion with friends, family, loved ones who knew Jesus, but died before us. It actually appears and seems to indicate in the New Testament that we will have a sense of memory of this life as well. In fact, there's a passage in Revelation where Christians who were killed because of their faith in Christ actually remember how they died. And so it appears that in a very real sense, the relationships with other followers of Jesus in this life will carry over, only this time without sin and without pride and without hurt and without ever getting, any of that ever getting in the way again. And however, let me just say this, knowing people in heaven doesn't mean that those relationships take on the same roles. Matthew 22, Jesus said that there won't be marriage or giving of marriage in heaven. That role won't necessarily be there. I have no doubt that I'm gonna know Jenny, and then we will have some sense of a deeper connection, but the marriage relationship is not a role that we're gonna carry for each other because it's not needed. That was a symbolic sort of expression of the intimacy that God wants for us, and now in the new heavens and new earth, it will be perfect. Your parents are not gonna be parenting you anymore in the new heavens and new earth. Some of you are like, thank God, right? Because I think you'll know, but the role shifts. The roles don't seem to carry over. Remember, Paul was trying to encourage the Thessalonians in this passage related to their loved ones that they knew who had died. And he comforts them by telling them that they will be reunited with any loved ones who knew Jesus. And I need to state that real clearly. Which brings me to a point I feel like I just need to be real clear about. I need to state this very difficult truth clearly and with as much grace as I possibly can. But the scriptures are clear. Jesus was clear. That God will never force himself on anyone. That is not his nature, not his character. That we are given a choice in this life as to whether or not we want to surrender ourselves to Jesus and trust him with our lives. And we can reject the gift of the cross and go through life on our own 2 feet. And in the next life, God will give you what you want most: separation from him. The Bible describes this separation as hell. Utterly isolated, alone, fractured, disintegrating, falling apart with no hope apart from God. And see, God doesn't really send people to hell. He just gives us what we desire and what we want. And if we don't want his presence, he won't force it on us. I actually like the way C.S. Lewis said it. C.S. Lewis was an atheist who became a Christian in the middle of the 20th century. And he said it this way. He said, God gives us all of this life to surrender and say to him, to look at him and say, God, your will be done in my life. But in the next life, God will look at you and say, your will be done. You can have what you wanted most. The offer of heaven and of the peace that comes from eternally being in the presence, it's available to you. To simply confess that you trust that what he did on the cross has covered all of your sins, and you choose today to orient your life around him now. I also realize that with a topic like this, like the one we're talking about today, some of you are saying, Jace, what about my loved ones who I'm not sure they knew Jesus? And here's what I would say to you today. What I know is that God will do everything he can to give us every opportunity for us to choose to come under his grace. Think about it. At the very last moment on the cross with the thief, the criminal beside him, Jesus was still inviting him. God is infinitely creative in how he will make himself known to the people that we love so that they have every opportunity to respond to him. So I don't know what their response was. I don't know. But I know Jesus, until the very last moment of life, was inviting them and making his grace known to them. And what I do know is that you're here right now, and you can know, and you can make that decision. You can let your loved ones know that you have decided to trust that what Jesus did on the cross is enough for you. And do you know what that will do for your loved ones? One day, when it's your last day, it will help them grieve with hope. When we were making plans for this series months ago, I didn't realize at that moment how personal this would all be for our extended family. On Wednesday, October 18th, so 6, 7 weeks ago now, I guess, my sister hopped on our family group chat, and she let us know that Noah, their 15-year-old son, said that he wasn't feeling well. Noah and her husband, Rachel and her husband, Nathan, they did what every parent would do. When our kids say that they're not feeling well, all right, why don't you get some rest, give you a little bit of medicine, assume it's something like the flu, had them lay down. By Thursday morning, that was Wednesday, by Thursday morning, he was noticeably more sick, and the coloring of his skin looked yellow, and so they took him to the emergency room, and it quickly became clear that whatever Noah was experiencing was beyond their capabilities, and so they sent him to the Children's Hospital of Atlanta. By Friday morning, although they didn't know why, at this point, they at least knew that something was affecting Noah's red blood cells. In fact, this is kind of crazy. I mean, by the time they were trying to run all these tests and do all these labs on his blood, and in the minutes, just minutes, that between when they would draw blood from Noah and then by the minutes it took to get it to the lab, even in those few minutes, by the time it got to the lab, it was so broken down they couldn't even test it. They couldn't read any of it. They gave him several blood transfusions that day, but his body broke down the blood faster than they could replace it. I had that Friday off, and so I just took long walks that day. I put on worship music. I listened to worship pretty much the whole day. I think there's something so powerful sometimes about just filling our minds and filling our hearts with the truth and the reminder of God's goodness, even in the midst of hard things. So I just played worship music all day long. And honestly, that day, I just kind of begged God, I did, begged God for healing for Noah. And that the doctors would get some answers because they just didn't know. That night around 2:30 a.m., I heard a knock on my bedroom door. It was my daughter, Sienna, was there, and my phone was on silence, but she said, "Hey, Dad, Uncle John's on the phone and he needs to talk to you." And so I got on the phone with him, and John was telling me he was on the way to the hospital, and he wanted to tell me about Noah's hemoglobin levels. Now, hemoglobin kind of basically just measures some of the way that your blood is carrying oxygen. Let's just say it like that. Anything below 10 is critical. Noah's had dropped to 2.4. They told my sister and my brother-in-law that if Noah were an adult, he'd be dead. But because he was younger, his heart was a little bit stronger, it was just working overtime. And we stayed up the rest of the night, obviously, praying, begging God for one word, just one word. You know, we sang that song a moment ago, "You heal and I've witnessed it." I've seen it. I've seen God work. I've seen God do these things. Man, we were begging God, I've seen it. I've witnessed it. Please do it again. We went through Saturday. He got multiple blood transfusions, but it just became obvious at one point that all these blood transfusions were doing was just buying the doctors time to try to figure out what was happening. And so they decided to put him in a paralytic sedation. His breathing had become labored, and they wanted the ability to operate at a moment's notice. By Sunday afternoon, he was in critical condition. A Zoom prayer meeting was set up, and over 150 people were on the call, literally from all over the world, just to pray. That started at 9 p.m. that Sunday night. At 9:30, Noah coded for the first time. They were able to bring him back, but he just continued this pattern for hours. These people stayed on the Zoom call praying until 1:28 a.m. And then they felt a kind of a release to stop, and Noah passed 10 minutes later. Wednesday to Sunday night. 48 inches, 4 or 5 days. Sometimes that's all it takes. That's how quickly things turn. You know, I debated even sharing some of this with you. You know, sometimes I debate sharing too many things just personal because I don't want it to be about me. But I also need you to know and part of the reason I felt compelled to is because I want you to know these things we talk about here, they're not ideas. They're not concepts. They are real to me and to you and to so many people here. This is just a reality we've had to walk through right now, and I know that we're not alone in that. Many of you, you've experienced the suddenness of loss. Some of you are watching loved ones right now experience a slow fading away because of sickness. Some of you, it's been years since the loss, and yet this time of year brings back the sting of that loss. And in those days that Noah was so sick, I knew that one day I was gonna share this story with you, with my church, but I truly believed, I was convinced, I truly believed that when I shared the story, it was gonna be a sharing of how God healed him. But nope, it's a story of grief. But here's what I got to see lived out in front of me. I watched a mom and a dad, my sister and my brother-in-law. I got to watch a mom and a dad grieve with hope. I watched them talk with deep anguish and sadness and brokenness about the tragic loss of their son Noah, but confidently speak of the assurance they had that they would see him again. I watched them hold each other while weeping, while also praying at the same time, praying and thanking God that Noah was at peace and in the presence of Jesus. Both of these things held together: grief and hope. And you can have that too. You can have that too because of what Jesus Christ has done for us.